the very first West Devon Borough Council virtual council meeting. I trust all members have managed to read through the most recent protocol for remote formal discussion decision-making meetings. It's quite important that you have, but if you haven't, one of the things that we need to remember is, firstly, while we're doing these Skype calls, please keep your microphones on mute until asked to join /question/debate. Note the conversation section on your screens is there purely for you to ask questions and or to ask to join debate. So if you want to ask a question, write question. And if you want to do that for debate, do the same thing. And you'll be taking it in turn as we would in any other meeting. But just type those words, don't type anything else in that column at all. If you happen to be joining us on mobile phones, can you please make sure, and as for technical reasons, do not take any calls on your device during this session, please. I think that we're making a bit of history today because this is the first time that West Devon Borough Council has had to go through this, and of course every other council in the country will be doing something similar. Firstly, before I start the meeting proper, as I assume you are all aware that Mr. Dennis Bater passed away recently. I first met Dennis back in 2007 when he was Mayor of West Devon Borough Council and I was Mayor of Oakhampton. And whenever we met from then on, he always greeted me with a big smile and a firm handshake. Dennis always had his community uppermost in his mind, and he will certainly be missed. So what I'd like to do now is could I now ask you all to stand for a minute's silence in recognition of the recent passing of Mr. Dennis Bater, who was Mayor of West Devon Borough Council 1998 and 1990 and 2007-8. Thank you very much. So if we can move into the formal meeting. Mr. White, could I have apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've got an apology for this afternoon's virtual meeting from Councillor Spettigue. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Item 2, confirmation of minutes to approve and adopt as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 18th of February 2020. So is everyone in agreement that this is a true reflection of that meeting? Mr. White, would you like to take this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the purpose of the record, if any members do not support the approval of those minutes, please speak now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. I invite members to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests. Any declarations would need to state if the interest is personal or disclosable pecuniary and the nature of that interest. If anybody has any interest at all, could you type interest? If not, I'll carry on. Right. Item 4, communications and business brought forward by me. I don't have any business to come forward today. So we'll move straight on to item 5, which is the most relevant, I suppose, at the moment, which is remote meetings draft procedure rules. This is pages 13 and 20, which I can see on my big screen. So I'd like to ask the leader to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members, you have in front of you a paper which explains the circumstances surrounding this proposal to adopt a remote meetings procedure. This, of course, follows on from legislation that's been passed through Parliament, which on the one hand no longer requires councils during the currency of the present emergency to hold an annual meeting and allows us to set up procedures so that we can hold remote meetings such as the meeting today. There is a remote meetings procedure which is included in the appendix, and I'd like to invite questions on that. You'll note that one of the main thrusts of the paper is that meetings that are going to be held will be those meetings that are deemed to be necessary for the running of the council. We will be adopting procedures to try and take as many decisions as we can under delegated authority, but obviously involving members as much as possible. And that is as much to do with this present situation that we find ourselves in as with the resources that the council has and the fact that many officers have been redeployed onto different and more immediate tasks. And we just don't really have the capability to run the whole spread and range of meetings that we'd normally expect. So the procedures that we're proposing are in the appendix, and I'd like, if I may, to invite any questions that anybody has at this point.
Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just got one question, and that is, in the absence of an AGM, if working groups and committees continue, can we assume that the constitution of those committees and working groups will remain as they are currently?
Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Without any alterations to those, the makeup of those groups or their constitution, which would normally happen in AGM, those facilities will continue as before.
Okay, Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. So Can I have a recommendation, a proposal, and a second for recommending the proposal?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to propose the recommendation outlined in the paper that it is recommended that the council adopts the remote meetings procedures rules set out at Appendix A. If I could have a seconder, please.
Happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Now we start the voting system. So if I can ask Mr. White to take over here, please.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, before we do any members wish to debate that proposal?
Sorry, beg your pardon. Okay, so any debate? Yes, Councillor Jury.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was merely putting up a reminder that we have to have a debate, or at least the opportunity to do so. Apologise for misleading you.
No, not at all. That's easily done today. Anyhow, any debate from anybody? No, thank you. Now we can go to the recommendation and a vote. So the vote, please, Mr. White.
Before we move to the sorry, Mr. Mayor, before we move to the vote, can I just double check procedurally? There is on the screen that I've shared in red font, there is a subject to as a minor amendment. Can I just check that as proposer and seconder, Councillor Jury and Cheadle are both happy to include that in their substantive motion?
Apologies, Mr. White. Yes, I'm happy to include that in the substantive motion. I hope everybody can see that on the screen.
And I am too.
Thank you, members. So therefore, we will have our inaugural recorded vote by virtual means. So members, please, in alphabetical order, Councillor Ball.
Is Councillor Ball here?
Councillor Ball's not.
Thank you.
Councillor Bolton.
I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bridgewater.
Yes, I'm in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
For.
Councillor Coulson.
I believe Councillor Coulson's having some difficulty with his audio. I think he can hear us, but he can't. Oh, sorry, the other way around. He can speak, but he can't hear. I'll just speak to him briefly.
Okay, Councillor Crozier.
Yes, for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel.
Yes, I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Davies.
Not with us.
Councillor Edmonds.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Ewings.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hayworth.
Well, I'm for. Sorry, I had trouble putting it on. Thank you.
No problem. Councillor Hipsey.
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Jury.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp. Councillor Kemp.
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Yes.
For. Thank you. Councillor Kimber.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Leach.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Moody.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Musgrave.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe.
I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Renders.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Ridges.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Samuel.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sellis.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Southcott.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Vashon.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Yelland.
For.
Thank you, members. I can now declare that result carried by unanimous vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, I'd like to move on to item 6, appointment of the Chief Executive. Bear with me, too many screens here. I'd like to ask the leader to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members will have in front of you a report dealing with the appointment of the new Chief Executive and Head of Paid Service. I'm sure everyone will be aware of the circumstances surrounding the very tail end of the selection procedure, and sadly we didn't get to go through the full process that we were hoping and the full involvement of members. But nevertheless, we do feel that we went through a very rigorous process in order to come to a decision. There was a panel of members, including 3 from each of the 2 councils, who considered the shortlisted set of applicants. We had a very high quality field. We had a very intensive couple of days of interviews, some of them conducted online, and we've come up with a recommendation, and I for one am very happy with the way the process went, and I hope that members feel able to support that and to agree with our decision. So the paper, I think, sets out the process that we went through and asks for the approval of council to those appointments. It also allows for the interim appointment of the Deputy Chief Executive as an interim until such time as the new post holder can take up his post. You will, of course, be aware that the successful candidate was Andy Bates, who currently is the LGA representative in the Southwest, and Andy has been working very closely with us and with Mr. Molyneux in recent weeks as part of the response to the coronavirus emergency. So with that, I'd like to offer the paper to you and take any questions if there are any.
No questions. Councillor Ewings.
With regard to approving the Deputy Chief Exec acting up as the interim Chief Exec, does that get backdated until from when Mrs. Hoskin left West Devon?
There has been a financial arrangement made. Perhaps I could just ask whether that is, I believe it is backdated to that date. Is Andy there at all? Can you confirm that to be the case, Andy?
It's Andy Wilson here. Yes,
Andy Wilson.
confirm that.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Ewings?
That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you.
Thank you. Need to just check that nobody wants to ask any questions on the appendix, because if they do, we would have to move into part 2. So if you can, if there's nothing left on that one, then so would you like it, Leader, would you like to now do the recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, if I may, I would like to put the recommendation before Council as shown on page 21, that the Council resolves to agree, 1, the appointment of the recommended successful candidate for the position of Chief Executive and Head of Paid Service as detailed in the exempt Appendix A, and 2, the interim appointment of the Deputy Chief Executive as the interim Chief Executive and Head of Paid Service until the new Chief Executive and Head of Paid Service commences employment with the Council. If there's any debate, obviously we'd be happy to consider.
Okay. Can I have a proposer and a seconder?
I'd like to propose that, if I may.
And I'm happy to second it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any debate? That's quiet afternoon. Okay, thank you very much. If we can take this to the vote now, please, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So once again, members in alphabetical order. Councillor Ball, has he joined the call? No. Councillor Bolton?
4.
Councillor Bridgewater?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Coulson, is he on the call? No. Councillor Crozier?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel?
4.
Councillor Davies, rejoined?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Edmonds?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ewings?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hayworth?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hipsey?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Jewry?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Camp?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Kimber?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Leach?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Moody?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mott?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Musgrave?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Renders?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ridgers?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Samuel?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Sellis?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Southcott?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Vashon?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Wood?
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Yelland?
4.
Thank you, members. That vote is therefore unanimous and the recommendation duly carried. Thank you.
Okay, just to confirm, you did pick up Councillor Coulson. Did you?
I didn't actually, sorry. Was Councillor Coulson in favour as well?
It's come through as a message.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just for keep everything straight. Okay, thank you very much indeed, councillors. Yeah, thanks members for the attendance. And I formally close the meeting and ask members to provide me with feedback on the operation of this meeting to myself and to White. Councillor Ewings would like to do a comment now.
Yes, I think as a council we should have wished Her Majesty a happy birthday today, as the meeting is being held on her birthday.
Well, I'll formally wish Her Majesty a very happy birthday for today. I guess everybody else will join in.
Happy birthday.
Yes.
Your Majesty.
Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to make a comment that the team that has facilitated this new system deserves our congratulations. It's been a triumph.
Yeah. Yes. Nerve-wracking. I'm glad it's just a very short agenda today. So any more comments? I have formally brought this to an end. So I'll thank you again, and we'll join together next Tuesday for a much longer agenda and see how it goes. Yes, Councillor Ewings.
No, I've written the comment is just a comment for Councillor Jury as to whether he may need to change rooms.
Okay, if we can not use that comment box and make it a habit not to use the comment box, because it could be easily slipped into the formal meeting. Right, so thank you very much, and I'll speak